Welcome, welcome, welcome in everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with Care Patrol, where education is the heart of everything we do. We appreciate you being here for today's presentation, Care Navigation in Action, Real World Case Studies from the Field. If you're new to Care Patrol, we are care advisors, senior care advisors, and what we do is hold the hand and answer the questions of individuals and families who have questions about aging care, whether that's who to go to as a physician or what home health have seen have success or rehab or what assisted living. And in the case of assisted living, we're paid by the assisted living. That's our model so that we are at no charge to the families and individuals that we help. Just like these CEUs are at no charge to you. Greetings, Ms. Hurd. We are accredited by the Alabama Board of Nursing. We're also accredited by the Alabama Board of Social Work. And each of those tell us that today's presentation is worthy of one contact hour, care navigation in action. So we encourage discussion. I am posting in the chat room our evaluation link. In order to receive a certificate and credit for today's presentation, you must complete the evaluation. The evaluation is password protected. And in this way, we can show to the Board of Social Work that today's hour was a live hour in which you had the opportunity to ask questions or present your own ideas or contrary ideas, even. We encourage you to participate, and I know that this is benefits from your outcomes and your outlook and your observations. So we encourage participation through the chat room. If you're new to Zoom, move your cursor to the top of the screen, a black bar will appear, or down to the bottom, a black bar will appear upon which, excuse me, is the word chat, and join us. Our link, I'll read for you now if you're at your desk and doing other things. Our link is https colon forward slash forward slash www.surveymonkey.com forward slash lowercase r forward slash all uppercase letters F as in Frank, D as in David, the number 3, Q, Z as in zoo, M as in Mary, N as in Nancy. Hello, Miss Harris from Philadelphia. You must complete the evaluation, and you'll have until 8 o'clock tonight when it closes to allow for your workday to take over, as it will for so many of you. Everyone who does the evaluation will receive credit and a certificate. Nurses will post your hours for you on the ABN. Our objectives for today's presentation are threefold. We want to evaluate long-term care continuity versus the need for acute discharge or emergent and acute discharge models. We want to hopefully analyze complex and fractured family structures and surrogacy friction and show a pathway for mediating that. And we want to formulate we hope, a comprehensive logistical care coordination strategy that supplements the work that all of you do. So, hospital transitions. I know not each of you work in a hospital setting, but you may have, and you certainly understand the pressures on the systemic pressures involved in hospital discharges. So there are systemic length of stay pressures we know because of hospital financial viability. And we know that that drives immediate discharge expectations, and case managers who are in charge of this are given sometimes just hours to transition someone once medically stable. But the social variables are more complex. Just because someone is medically cleared, it doesn't equal the fact that they are ready to be placed in some sort of setting, clinically or otherwise. You have, and you encounter, as you know, unprepared families, patients who are experiencing, sometimes just due to being in the hospital, cognitive decline. They obviously have presented with some sort of complex physical ailment, perhaps mental incapacity. And you see that the home safety issues are colliding with their ongoing safety and care. And this threatens the stability of the discharge. Y'all probably know this. There are 53 million family caregivers in the United States. 53 million. That's what, 1/5, 1/6 of the population. Millions of family caregivers provide unpaid and untrained and non-professional support. And they're typically navigating their own stressors from work to family life, children, job, dinner. When an unexpected crisis hits, and this is when they see you, a fall, an acute illness, a stroke, that home support model collapses and it places overwhelming pressure on you in the emergency department and in the hospital on the inpatient floor. So there's a clinical threshold. I found this interesting. The data show that individuals aged 65 to 74, about 15% of those require help with at least one activity of daily living or instrumental activity of daily living, paying bills. Ages 75 to 84, the next decade or cohort, that nearly doubles to 29%, reporting some sort of limitation for which they need assistance. And then those that are graced to live at 85 and above, 6 in 10 require help with the basic activities of bathing or eating or transferring. And the impact of this is that when a senior, really the correct term now is aging adult, when an aging adult loses 2 ADLs, they usually require 24/7 supervision. This is a clinical milestone. It's also a financial emergency and a placement issue. So we see, and you know, if you worked in the setting, there are systemic transition bottlenecks that occur. There are rapid placement demands placed upon the discharge planner. The staff must align transitions quickly, but the families with whom they are working are entirely uneducated about aging care and the guidelines therein. And so there's a gridlock naturally that occurs because presenting with them with a sheet of options that are really unvetted somewhat only causes confusion and oftentimes analysis paralysis. And this delays hospital discharges. And even if they act quickly and begin calling communities, communities typically won't tell you the cost. They want you to tour first. And so the individual has to tour multiple communities. Some they may not be able to afford, they find out. Some may not be able to meet the level of care that they need, they find out. And so it's a time consuming process and it delays the hospital discharge. And then there are sometimes missing documentation, missing physician records, missing documents from the primary care physician or complex medical histories that just require a whole lot of untethering and further delay placement. So I'll ask y'all, this is kind of complex, but in acute or rehab settings, we're all bound by strict insurance clocks. When you know a family is choosing an unsafe discharge to home, out of denial, out of guilt. How do you manage that transition within your boundaries professionally? Where, in other words, does your job end? So, in acute or rehab settings, those of you who've had experience there, you know that you're bound by a strict insurance clock that dictates everything. When you know that the family is nearing discharge and they are choosing an unsafe discharge to home, either out of denial or out of guilt or for some other reason, how do you manage that transition within your professional boundaries? In other words, where does your job end? Ms. Bradley says schedule a care plan and call APS, Adult Protective Services, for further assistance if this does not address the issue. I like that, Ms. Bradley, and thank you for your response. Let's look at a case study. That's what we promised at the heading. This is on long-term client advocacy. Ms. Hurd says, my experience was to have a family session with community agencies and or APS. Ms. Bowyer, excuse me, says try and be as honest as possible while being as empathetic regarding family needs. Discuss service limitations for community resources and if needed, contact APS. We were able to support a family. You educate the patient of possible gaps based on the patient-informed decision and call APS for limitations, as Ms. Henderson. Thank y'all so much. This is great. Our case study shows the power of persistence and continuity of care. So you know that you're bound by acute care timelines, again, insurance driven. So once a patient is discharged, naturally, because you have someone else on the dock, your involvement ends. When you work with a senior care advisor, they can operate differently. In this case, our first contact with this family was in June of 2023. At the time, a friend of a friend, an attorney whose former colleague had a father in crisis. We spoke, and at that time, they decided to have their father discharged home and not into a community setting. He had cognitive decline, but they felt he still had the ability to live independently at home. And they provided sitters as support in keeping him at home. They chose to keep him home, yet the senior care advisor continued to stay in touch. In fact, maintained touch for over a 3 year period and tracked the family's journey while, the folks at the hospital were 3 years down the road and long past moved on. What we saw here was that in June of this year, there was a crisis point. So, this individual who had been living independently at home with cognitive decline with support from sitters had a fall. And the fall was due to severe dehydration, and he was thus hospitalized and also found to have a UTI. The condition, and this would be partly due to the UTI, was that his dementia was worsening. He had begun sundowning, for instance, and he was losing mobility being independent at home. And this so often happens with individuals who live at home with caregivers versus living in communities where they're kept more active. Generally, in the home, when someone is caring for you, they bring you your plate. They don't ask you to come to the dinner table and get it, but that coming to the dinner table and getting it keeps you active, keeps you going longer. I mean, health is in many ways mobility. And these were worsening, and he had started to develop some incontinence. So he was discharged to a Birmingham rehab, and he was given a 30-day window in which to find placement. Oops. So we performed a full care discovery, or the senior care advisor did. Let me say that it was me. We identified key preferences. They wanted a sanitary environment. They wanted a clean place. They wanted it to be memory care focused, and they knew he needed memory care. And they wanted one, if possible, that was close to one or both of them, the daughters. There were two. The person who initially called me had her older sister. So we simultaneously reached out to 15 different communities, trying to understand what would be the best fit based on different criteria, either proximity or care or some combination thereof or price. And then we helped streamline a touring schedule of those suggested uh, communities, however abridged. So we handled all the lifting of coordinating that, met the folks there, toured communities, which led them to be able to make an informed decision. And so the incoming call was June 4th. On June 9th, we toured, and we toured 4 communities. Each tour takes about 45 minutes, and then you have drive time. So we were together about 4.5, 5 hours. They selected a community as their top choice on that day, and made a commitment on the 17th of June, 8 days later, placed a deposit. On the 25th, they transitioned to a community, and they felt confident in the memory care in part, and this was one of those, I think, God things, nothing to do with me. But the director of nursing was a childhood friend of one of the daughters with whom they had really lost touch. And so it felt like it was a blessed, if you will, setting. And I've got a comment from Miss Blackman. From my experience at a hospital level, we would educate the patient and family on risk to the discharge plan and offer alternative options, but at the end of the day, it is ultimately the patient's decision. This is true. For example, if a patient came from the streets and chose to return to the streets, all we can do is offer resources, but we cannot force them to utilize them. If patient is unable to make their own informed decision, we would then notify APS. Unfortunately, you cannot notify APS just because you disagree with how some may choose to live. Good point, Ms. Blackman. So, key takeaways, I hope, from this case study, however abridged, is that follow up matters. So, this proves sort of the case of so called patient sticking, the ability to stay with families when they are not yet in crisis, but are on the radar. The care advisor was there in 2023 and there again in 2026 when the phone rang and they realized it was no longer safe for the individual to remain home. And so we were able to manage the coordination between the family with the legal guardians, which was the sister who called, and the various social workers involved. And I think we transformed what was potentially a crisis, a placement issue, into a structured and successful move within the span of 3 weeks. Here's my next question. How do you help a family maintain momentum and avoid complete decision paralysis when they are hit with a compound crisis, like trying to move one senior across state lines while another unexpectedly breaks a hip in a different state? Have any of you had any unusual circumstances? Obviously, not like this, but one in which you had to help a family maintain momentum. I'm sure you see or have seen in your work when you worked or worked in a hospital, this happen. How do you help a family maintain momentum and avoid complete decision paralysis when they are hit by a compound crisis? Ms. Craddock says provide simple and concise information to help with decision making, outlining in steps, and providing timeline information can help them prioritize. That's terrific. Ms. Loy says, typically I am called around this time, so I try to break things down into smaller parts and help them prioritize what is most important. Typically, you're called at this time. I love that. You're the problem solver. Ms. Bradley says, validate that they feel this way, offer them support, and provide them with resources to help them feel they are not alone. And that is so important. I'm sure we're all adults. We've all seen someone, perhaps a loved one, a family member, in a health crisis. And the thing you feel at first is alone. So I'm glad you work towards not having that. Ms. Hurd says, not overwhelmed with too much information at one time, making lists, offer support, and let them know they are not alone. Did I read that twice? No, you both said it. Oh gosh, I love that. So this is the B family, and I first heard from them in January of 2025. The wife's mother was 87, and she lived alone in Florida in St. Augustine, which is quite a stretch by car, on 60 acres by herself. She had AFib, she had high blood pressure, she had a history of pneumonia, and she had recently had skin cancer surgery. So the goal of the family was to move the, it was the husband's mother, move his mother to Madison, Alabama, near their home, so that he could A, be near her, and B, make sure that she was cared for properly in a community. And so this required transitioning from one state to another. So interestingly, the clients we toured together, and they were seeking so-called vibe, as well as, needing to meet a certain budget. And so we toured three communities, each of which presented a different vibe, so to speak, each of which were somewhat newly constructed, and, were nice, so to speak. And this was the vibe we were looking for. But at one of them, we were able to find out about a move-in special that would require them to sign by month's end, but would give them 2 months at half price. And this would allow then the mother to rehab in Florida and then transition and have a full 2 months to rehab. This met their financial ability. They were unique in that way, I would say. And so they selected the one they selected because they thought it had a laid back appeal. Remember, she's from Florida, but it also had a lot of Christian centered communities. Here's one. Miss Hurd says, can relate. 4 years ago, moved to Alabama from Oregon with my then 91-year-old mom. She was mobile in 2022, now bedbound and living with us. Well, God bless you for caring for others and then going home and caring for her. I didn't know that. So what we did, I feel, or the senior care advisor did, is sort of bridge a gap that allowed for the clinical things to happen that needed to happen, but preserved a place for this woman to live. The nurses, social workers could focus on the discharge to the rehab, while the advisor chose the destination, or didn't choose, that's the wrong word, help the family choose and focus on the destination. So they went to a rehab in St. Augustine. We continually checked in February and March while she regained her strength. We provided the family with a packing list for moving and logistics checklist for moving cross state. And we maintained contact with the community of choice to make sure that everything remained on track and that the financial deal held. And so this was sort of a multi-state crisis that the senior care advisor, and it could be anyone, it doesn't necessarily need to be me, could provide for you. So on the 19th of February, the family then reached out about a second emergency. The ex-husband of the woman who was moving to Madison fell and broke his hip in Florida. And so we were able to do some research on Florida-based skilled nursing. It was simple. You do it yourselves, medicare.gov. And then we also were working on moving the mother to Alabama. We did advise them on nursing home care, even though a senior care advisor is not able to, by Stark Law, be commissioned by nursing homes. So referral and placement activity in that vein is sort of gratis, pro bono, if you will. And that's fine. We do that all the time. All senior care advisors help whomever calls, or I can't say all, but the majority, all that I know. So what we were able to then provide in value was to manage two separate crises within the same family in two different states at the same time. We were able to have a geographic reach and knowing state specific level care guidelines, which Florida is markedly, radically different from Alabama in terms of what assisted living regulations will allow. So first we had to make certain that it made sense for her to move to Alabama and not remain in Florida. We maintained persistence. I hope that's the word that sticks. Throughout 3 months of her physical therapy, she took 3 months of therapy in Florida. And of course, social workers closed the file the day she discharged. By nature, there were 15 other people on the rack. And so we became the go-to trusted advisor for a family when in crisis. Here's a question for you. Most discharge protocols end the moment a patient safely checks in to an assisted living or memory care community. When a resident experiences a functional drop 3, 6, or 9 months post-placement, why do you think it's the default family instinct to panic and demand a skilled nursing facility? An upgrade, if you will, or a transition for sure. Or worse, they end up in the hospital ER. Have you encountered this? And I know we've said in one sense you don't encounter folks after they leave, but in another sense you do encounter people at snippets in their lives, ribbons in their lives that somehow embody needing or not needing to go to skilled nursing. You may have had people panicking on first blush and say, do they have to go to the nursing home? No, they don't. They can go home safely, or they can go to a community if you can afford it. Most discharge protocols end the moment a patient safely checks into assisted living or memory care. When they experience the patient a functional drop, why does the family panic and go to the ER? Ms. Bradley says they believe the placement is not a high enough level of care that meets their family members' needs. Well, that's true, certainly. I wonder why they jump to that, though. And I see it happen repeatedly. Miss Placencia, I hope I'm saying that right. Miss Knight says many times it is because they are overwhelmed. Ms. Placencia says families send their loved ones to a hospital because they think we can fix them and they will go back to their place of living. Sometimes it's just a general decline due to old age or chronic illness that we can't fix. So true. So this case study shows, I hope, the power of post-placement care and the ability to help an inappropriate escalation and visit to the ER and nursing home through managing a client's expectations. So in early 2025, February to be exact, a wife reached out to us seeking a permanent memory care solution for her husband. And first, she just wanted to consider it. And then she, of course, considered it. She was balancing guilt along with her budget. We looked at 13 different regional options, and we were trying to match her long-term care policy criteria to these. We toured multiple, 6, I remember, and they were in varying presentations, let's say, of the model we were seeking, different settings, let's say. And we learned that we preferred a single floor environment. That was important because the husband was a walker and needed some place to walk. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed a comment from Ms. Blackman. Yes, we would have families say their family member isn't ready for discharge because they were fully independent prior to coming, but now need a walker at discharge. That's well, you see, uneducated family expectations. We were able to achieve a room at a large single-story community with the largest interior and outdoor courtyard of any community, and the largest community in terms of square feet and walking distance in the Birmingham area. In fact, if you walked that community enough, you would lose weight. It was, probably 4 to 6 times around it were a mile. You could never get lost because it was a square. There was a fellow that had there years ago who walked so often that he did lose weight. He was a constant walker. So they started putting a half sandwich at the front. And every time he passed, they would hand out this half sandwich, which he would eat on his round and come back and get another half sandwich. And that's how they kept weight on him. But these are the nuances that a good memory care will notice and put into place. So you've got to, because of the nature of what you do as case managers, discharge planners, nurses, social workers, you have to exit the picture when they leave your picture. Whereas we have, as senior care advisors, the opportunity to provide consistent follow-up and maintain some sort of oversight, might be the wrong word, but continuity, let's say. And why this matters, because we kept tracking and logging a dozen times across 2025 after we moved in April. And we maintained an understanding then of the care that was present at this community at current and whether it was meeting her husband's needs. And she felt that because he was withdrawing and eating was becoming a difficulty, that he needed to be moved to skilled nursing. This was an instinctive error, much like the one that Miss Blackman expressed, where a family thinks, oh gosh, let's go to care level red. It wasn't required. What was required was a different setting. And so what we had to say, which is true to me, and forgive me for saying this if you work in a nursing home setting, but I do not think that someone with cognitive issues receives the same sort of scheduled interaction and activity as they would in a memory care when they are in a skilled nursing environment. And this concerned me because he was, when he entered, still social and affable, and everyone loved him in the community. And so what we did was reached out to an alternative community where I had had success and tried to get them to come and do an assessment of this individual to see if, in fact, he's still qualified for memory care or whether he needed skilled nursing, as the wife insisted. And so we were able to show that a different memory care with a more active calendar, more schedule, which people with dementia need schedule like toddlers do. It keeps them regulated. It keeps them from sundowning. And we were able to say that this will be a way to continue to preserve his independence and quality of life and dignity if he can succeed in this new memory care community versus going to skilled nursing. And so on January of this year, the family canceled the assessment that we had set up. February and March, we stayed in touch. We successfully got her to reconsider. They assessed. He passed the assessment, confirming that he did not require a more restrictive environment in a nursing home. And in April, then, he moved into this alternative memory care community where he is thriving. And his room looks great. His wife did a wonderful job. And so, what I hope, did as an advisor here, key takeaways. I hope that we help someone decondition from the notion that skilled nursing is always the answer when someone exhibits decline, or loss of socialization or hospitalization. I think we were able to act in a sense as a clinical anchor, bridging a transition between different providers with different abilities while preserving this client's independence. And I think being an advocate for them, 15, 16 months, well, now 18 months, I think, has proven to be a dedicated asset for the wife. Miss Bowyer or Bowyer, excuse me, ma'am, for not knowing how to say your name. There's a TV show on Netflix called Man on the Inside that taps into some of these themes of care transition needs in assisted living, skilled nursing, and memory care. It's a comedy series with Ted Danson. Highly recommend. Thank you for letting us know. And so we were long-term care advocates. And I don't mean long-term care as a entity, but I mean long-term, care advocates. Here's a question for you to think. What happens when the legal POA, the biological family member in this case, and the live-in non-spouse romantic partner flatly disagree on the patient safety thresholds? How do you mediate that conflict without alienating the person providing the daily care, who is that live-in non-spouse romantic partner? Please share your strategies that have either worked for you or that you've heard for managing when a patient like this, and remember, the woman in question, the POA, was acting as durable because she had dementia and could not make decisions, yet was refusing rehab with the support of her live-in romantic partner. So, what happens when the legal power of attorney, in this case, the biological family member, and the live-in non-spouse romantic partner flatly disagree on the patient's safety thresholds and needs? How do you mediate that conflict without alienating the person who is providing the daily care, in this case, that live-in romantic partner? Please share your strategies for managing these rehab refusals, because it's going to lead to caregiver burnout and you're going to see them again. How do you manage this? How do you manage when the POA, who is acting as durable because the patient has cognitive challenges and refuses help, with the support of the live-in caregiver partner, This is our fourth case study where we had to navigate exactly these factional family dynamics. And she continued to decline cognitively throughout our process and took on the behavioral risk of wandering. And there was a lot of friction between the live-in and the POA who stepped back and let the live-in take control along with or to the experiences or wishes of the uh, client. Ms. Blackman says, we had a similar situation at the hospital and planned a family meeting to include the power of attorney and the live-in partner, with the interdisciplinary team to include social worker, case manager, doctor, and the physical therapy and occupational therapy teams. Ms. Hill says, I haven't had this experience, but legally I would assume the family gets to decide, but they both should come together to make this happen. And they did in a sense, because in this case, the POA stepped back. Tricky scenario, says Ms. Hurd. Having input from a medical professional or a nurse manager may help out, as well as validating the caregiver's role in care. That needed to happen. You're right. Ms. Bradley says, educate the romantic partner on the resident's needs. Ultimately, the POA would make decisions concerning safety if the romantic partner could not realize the risk. Also, educate the romantic partner on caregiver burnout. That's a good point. And support to the caregiver, as well as making the caregiver feel a part of the next uh, steps with their romantic partner. All great ideas, and thank you all for those. So, our client, our patient in this case, was 80 years old, and we were called by a friend or who was also a former client. His boss called us on his advice following a crisis that occurred involving this 80-year-old woman with cognitive issues. She had, in fact, progressive cognitive impairment, although comprehensive neurological assessments at UAB had ruled out Parkinson's disease, even though she had a high fall risk frequency and had loss of balance mechanics, severe spatial disorientation, unmanaged hypertension, and an acute history of AFib. And what happened for them to proceed to call us was this she contracted COVID and the flu at the same time. Y'all remember when that was happening, COVID and the flu at once, sort of at the end of COVID? She was left unmonitored, in essence, living with her romantic partner. And she suffered a fall at night in her townhome and lay there helpless until he came the next day before she was discovered. And so the challenge here was that we had opposing factions with different senses of the risk tolerance of this lady. The power of attorney was the brother and his wife, and they felt that the priority was that nothing come to her in harm's way and that she be contained because she had shown or started to show a propensity for wandering. This is how she felt in her townhome, in fact, wandering around at night, which she would do, and rearrange things or whatever she would do. They realized that the home care interventions that they tried had failed and that living in an independent situation, continuing to live independently in her home unmonitored was unsafe. It was a risk. They did secure a residential care network. That was their goal, was to secure a care network. The cohabitant, who the romantic partner, and I said he lived with her, he stayed some nights and didn't stay some nights. He had his own place. Um, he felt that the thing to pay most attention to was her wishes, that she must maintain her autonomy even in spite of her cognitive dysfunction. And he was in denial that she was at risk. He, in fact, minimized the risk that she was at. And, uh, while she was at the hospital, was really not there. Uh, when this whole initial illness happened, he wasn't there, right? He didn't get there till the next day. And so his goal was, he opposed any sort of contained community setting, and wanted to continue to have the client, the lady in question, live in her home independently. And his idea is that he would move in more permanently. And I have a comment from Ms. Bradley. Oh, no, I think I read that. I'm sorry, y'all. So this was an 11-month progression, um, from their initial call to us in January of 20, I believe it was 2025. We let them know of our help. We helped them obtain private duty home care. And, there through June, she refused their help, so remained independent. July through August, we suggested that due to her mini mental exam, which they had shared with me, that it was a safety risk to have her living unmonitored, unsupervised at home. They agreed. We scheduled tours, and then they canceled those tours. They were in denial. Again, the brother, the power of attorney, wanted to allow the sister to make her own decisions, knowing as he did that she really could not understand the risk involved. October, early November, they began to see more extensive cognitive uh, progression of disease, but it caused them to want to tour a community. So we did. During this tour, she wandered and was looking for her brother, who she was convinced lived down the hall, although he was long since deceased. And it was not sundowning. This was probably, I don't know, 11 o'clock in the day when we were there. And yet the partner tried to block a placement, promising that he was going to retire. Remember, he was 82. He was going to retire. And when he did, he would take care of her. And we had to share with him the same many mental information to show to him the criteria for independent living and assisted living and memory care, what those look like, and where she would be most suited. So we sort of neutralized this assertion that she could be autonomous, that the romantic living partner insisted on and the brother allowed. And even though we had toured and the family had decided to make a transition, he intervened and had her claim and claimed that she could make her own choices about where she lived, and that they were going to move to a private home, move in together and not just visit her and, here and there. But the score said this is not safe. She can't be left at these times, even intermittently between the time that you retire, whenever that is, you're 82. and her wandering at night. This is not safe. And we were able to get the primary care physician to write a letter stating that she had cognitive dysfunction and could not make her own decisions. And this allowed the brother, power of attorney, to relieve his guilt because he could switch the burden of her needing to move onto medical opinion versus his, the brother's. We did transition successfully in December of that year, so 12 months later, and we ended up compromising. We got the romantic partner to agree to move in permanently with the client in independent living so that he would be there at night if she wandered. They would have the support of the independent living community, just in terms of the way communities pull together, but also in terms of, having call buttons if they needed something. They had the support of private duty that would come in smaller increments, in the 15-minute increments, to do things like deliver medications to keep her on track. And it had meals and activities and transportation and a social life. And so it allowed her to feel autonomous. It got him to sort of come to the fore and do be the live-in caregiver. And they've done remarkably well. He's integrated into the same ecosystem, now considers himself part of the community. And each time that we've talked with them from the end of the last year through now, she's had zero falls. And so we think it was the right placement. So the key takeaways from this would be that data trumps emotion. Sharing things with people does, in many cases, work. We were able to leverage medical authority to transpose the burden from the caregiver or the power of attorney to the medical community. And we continue to follow up. And I think that that follow up has kept her from acute settings. That's it for today. I would welcome any questions or discussion. We are nearing the end of the hour, though, so let me read again for you the survey link, which you must do in order to receive a certificate and receive credit for today. The link is https:// www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/ all uppercase letters and numbers, F as in Frank, D as in David, 3, Q, Z as in zoo, M as in Mary, N as in Nancy. It is password protected. The password is advisor with a capital A, lowercase DVISOR. Advisor is the password. Thank you so much for your attention today. I hope it was interesting for you, probably a little different from the work that you do, but it gave you some insight into the work that we do, and I hope you appreciated that. Join us again on July 14 when we'll have Billy Curtis from the Alzheimer's Association discussing further communication and other strategies when dealing with folks with Alzheimer's. Thank you so much, Ms. Hawkins, Ms. Hurd. You're welcome. I appreciate y'all being here. I hope y'all have a great few weeks and have a great 4th of July. Be safe, and we'll see you soon, I hope.